My name is Ilara. For most of my life, that name has felt like a quiet secret, something whispered rather than declared. I've always lived in the gentle shadows, a life of muted colors and soft edges, especially when compared to the vibrant, sun-drenched world my sister, Serafina, inhabited. We grew up in Port Blossom, a city of contrasts, where the salty tang of the old fishing wharfs mingled with the manicured perfection of the newer, wealthier enclaves. Our family lived somewhere in the middle, but Sarah, it seemed, was always destined for the sunlit cliffs overlooking the ocean. She was the golden child, a fact established so early and so completely that it felt less like a dynamic and more like a law of nature. When Sarah wanted the latest phone from Technova, it would appear on her bedside table. When a new fashion trend swept through her high school, her closet would magically bloom with the requisite styles. I, on the other hand, was a connoisseur of thrift store treasures and hand-me-downs, a landscape of faded fabrics and styles that were never quite my own. From the age of 14, my evenings and weekends were spent behind the counter of a local bookstore, the scent of old paper and ink a constant comfort. The money I earned was my own, a small, fiercely guarded treasure I used to buy the things I wanted: a new set of drawing pencils, a concert ticket, a book that wasn't pre-loved. I never harbored any real resentment for this. It was simply the way things were. My parents provided a roof over my head, food on the table, and a solid, if emotionally distant, foundation. I learned young that my own two hands were the most reliable tools I had. Independence wasn't a choice, it was a garment I tailored to fit me perfectly over the years. So, when my parents announced they were giving Sarah and her new husband a wedding gift of $1 million to buy a home, I was genuinely, incandescently happy for her. They purchased a breathtaking property in Seacliff Heights, a place of sweeping glass walls and panoramic ocean views, a home that looked like it had been plucked from the pages of an architectural magazine. Standing in their gleaming, minimalist living room during their housewarming party, I felt a familiar, gentle pang, not of jealousy, but of a quiet acknowledgement of the chasm between our lives. It was the same chasm that had always been there, just wider and more clearly defined now. I was proud of her, and I was proud of myself for having built a life that, while different, was entirely my own. For years later, the soft glow of a Port Blossom evening settled over the small balcony of the apartment I shared with Leo. He was my calm, my anchor, a man whose love was as steady and unassuming as the tide. When he knelt on that balcony, the city lights twinkling below us like a fallen constellation, and asked me to be his wife, my world shifted into a brighter focus. I said yes with a heart so full I thought it might burst. We began planning a wedding that felt like us, simple, intimate, and deeply personal. We pictured a small gathering in the city's historic botanical garden, surrounded by ancient ferns and the quiet murmur of our closest friends and family. We had our savings, a carefully accumulated nest egg, and we were determined to create a beautiful day without plunging ourselves into debt. That's when the unexpected happened. My parents, who had always maintained a polite but distinct distance from the financial realities of my adult life, sat us down in their formal living room, a room that always felt more like a museum than a home. "Ilara," my father began, his voice laced with an unfamiliar enthusiasm. "Your mother and I have been talking. We want to pay for the wedding. All of it." I was stunned into silence. I glanced at my mother, who was smiling, a rare, unguarded expression on her face. "We didn't do this for you before," she said, her voice softer than usual. "And we want to. Let this be our gift to you and Leo." Leo, ever gracious, thanked them profusely. I could only manage a choked, "Are you sure?" "Of course, we're sure," my father said, waving a dismissive hand. "You just focus on being happy. We'll take care of the rest." A warmth bloomed in my chest, a feeling I hadn't realized I'd been craving my entire life, the feeling of being seen, of being chosen. Their involvement was more than just financial. They were engaged, asking about florists, tasting cakes with us, debating music choices. My father, who typically communicated in gruff monosyllables, delivered a speech at the rehearsal dinner that was so full of love and pride it brought tears to my eyes. For the first time, I felt like I wasn't the shadow child, but a daughter they were genuinely, unequivocally proud of. Our wedding day was perfect. The sun filtered through the glass roof of the conservatory, dappling the stone path with light. Leo looked at me with such profound love that the rest of the world faded away. I danced with my father, his hand warm and steady on my back, and he told me I'd never looked more beautiful. My mother hugged me, a long, tight embrace that felt like it was closing a gap that had existed between us for decades. It was everything I had never dared to dream of. The day was a perfect, luminous pearl, a memory I was ready to treasure forever. We were due to leave for our honeymoon in a week, a quiet trip to a cabin in the mountains, but we both had a few work commitments to wrap up first. The warmth of the wedding carried us through those next few days, a blissful, shimmering haze. Then, 5 days after we said, "I do," the warmth shattered. It arrived not with a bang, but with the quiet ping of an email. It was from my father. I smiled, assuming it was a sweet follow-up, maybe a link to a wedding photo he particularly loved, or a gift card for a celebratory dinner. My heart still felt soft and open towards them. I clicked it open. The message was brief, devoid of any warmth or sentiment. Subject: Wedding expenses reimbursement. Ilara. Please find attached the itemized invoice for all costs associated with your wedding. We require prompt settlement. Regards, Dad. My breath caught in my throat. My fingers trembled as I clicked on the attached PDF. There it was, laid out in cold, clinical detail. Venue rental, $15,000. Catering, 112 guests, $22,400. Floral arrangements, $8,200. Photographer. 6,500. Operator Everising Gleekspence, Downtothalask Kanapan Tharentaloft String Quartet, the final to tell it the bottom F tepage si med to burn itself in Tomavision. Operator 6,500. Every single expense, down to the last canopy and the rental of the string quartet. The final total at the bottom of the page seemed to burn itself into my vision. 6,500. Operator Everising Gleekspence, Downtothalask Kanapan Tharentaloft String Quartet. The final to tell it the bottom F tepage si med to burn itself in Tomavision. Operator. 62, 451.37 *. The air was knocked from my lungs. I felt a dizzying sense of vertigo, as if the floor had dropped away beneath me. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a bill. A transaction. The beautiful, heartfelt gift they had insisted on giving me was nothing more than a loan they were now calling due. "Leo," I whispered, my voice a thin, reedy thing. He was at his desk across the room. He looked up, his smile fading as he saw my face. "Ilara? What's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." I couldn't speak. I simply turned the laptop screen towards him. He came over, read the email, and then scrolled through the invoice. His expression shifted from confusion to disbelief, and then hardened into a quiet, protective fury. "No," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "Absolutely not. It wasn't about the money. We had the savings. We could pay it. It wouldn't be easy, but we could manage." But the principle of it, the principle was a gaping, bleeding wound. They had insisted. They had framed it as a gift, a gesture of love and reconciliation. They had basked in the glory of their generosity, delivering speeches and accepting the thanks of our guests. And now, in the sterile quiet of a weekday afternoon, they had sent me an invoice. The memory of Sarah's $1 million house, a gift given freely and joyfully, slammed into me. The disparity had always been a quiet hum in the background of my life, but this was a screaming siren. This was not just an invoice, it was a statement. A confirmation of every insecurity, every feeling of being second best I had ever had. The pearl of my wedding day had been a fake, and now the cheap coating was peeling away to reveal the worthless plastic underneath. The warmth in my chest had turned to a solid block of ice. That night, sleep was a stranger. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, the numbers from the invoice glowing in the dark behind my eyelids. Each line item felt like a tiny, deliberate cut. The cost of the champagne we toasted with. The price of the cake we joyfully cut together. Every moment of what I thought was pure, unadulterated love had been meticulously recorded and assigned a monetary value. Leo lay beside me, his arm wrapped protectively around me, his silent presence a balm on my fractured spirit. He was furious, but his anger was a shield for me, not a weapon. "We don't have to pay it, Elara," he whispered into the darkness. "We can just ignore it." "What are they going to do? Sue us?" "No," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "I'm going to pay it. All of it. I want it gone. I want the debt, both financial and emotional, to be cleared." A plan began to form in my mind, not out of anger, but out of a sudden, crystalline clarity. The independence I had cultivated since I was a girl, the resilience I had built brick by painstaking brick, was now my fortress. The next morning, while Leo made coffee, I sat at our small dining table. I took out my checkbook, the one we reserved for rent and serious expenses, and with a hand that did not shake, I wrote a check to my father for the full amount, $62,451.37. Then, I took out a piece of my best stationery, the thick, creamy paper I saved for special occasions, and I began to write. "Dear Mom and Dad. Enclosed you will find a check for the full amount of the wedding expenses. I was surprised to receive your invoice, but I am settling this account immediately so that we can all consider the matter closed. Your offer to pay for the wedding was the most generous thing you have ever done for me. It made me feel, for the first time in a very long time, that I was truly valued and loved in the same way as Sarah. I allowed myself to believe that the disparity I've felt my entire life might finally be evening out. That single, beautiful day, I felt like your daughter, without qualifiers or conditions. I now understand that this gift, like so many other things in our family, came with unspoken terms. I have been financially independent since I was 14 years old. I never asked you for anything beyond the basic necessities, and I never expected more. I built my life on my own terms, and I am proud of that. The pain of this isn't in the amount of money, it is in the bait and switch. It's in the emotional manipulation of offering a gift only to turn it into a debt. This will be our final financial transaction. I will not be accepting any gifts, monetary or otherwise, from you in the future. I need to protect myself from this kind of disappointment. I am drawing a boundary, not out of spite, but out of self-preservation. You have made it clear where I stand, and I accept it. Please, give your time, your energy, and your inheritance to Sarah. It is what you have always wanted to do, and I am finally letting go of the hope that it could ever be different. This check clears my debt. I hope it brings you what you want. Sincerely, Elara. I sealed the check and the letter in an envelope. Before heading to the post office, I stopped at a small gift shop and bought my mother a beautiful silk scarf in her favorite shade of blue. It was a preemptive peace offering for a war I had just declared, a final, confusing gesture of the daughter I used to be. I put it in a gift bag with a simple card that read, "Thinking of you." I mailed the package with the letter and the check, and on the walk home, I took out my phone. With a deep breath, I blocked my parents' numbers. Then I blocked their social media profiles. I needed silence. I needed space to breathe the clean air of my own life, free from their conditional atmosphere. When I got home, Leo wrapped me in his arms. "Are you okay?" he asked. "I think so," I said, and I was surprised to find that I meant it. A profound, aching sadness was there, but beneath it was a bedrock of relief. I had finally said it all. I had stood up for the 14-year-old girl who counted her tips at the end of a long shift, for the young woman who bought her own textbooks, for the new wife who had dared to hope she was loved unconditionally. I had paid the price, and now, I was free. The first few days were strangely peaceful. The silence from my parents was a void, but it was a clean void, not the crackling, tense silence that usually filled the space between us. I felt lighter, as if I had set down a heavy suitcase I hadn't even realized I'd been carrying for 30 years. Then the storm broke. It started with a text from my Aunt Carol. "Ilara, your mother is heartbroken. I can't believe you'd be so ungrateful. You need to call her and apologize." Then a call from my Uncle Ben. "What's this I hear about you causing trouble? Your parents have always been good to you. You're being dramatic." One by one, the messages flooded in. Aunts, uncles, cousins, even old family friends I hadn't spoken to in years. It was a coordinated attack, a campaign to paint me as the villain. They spoke of my parents' generosity, of how I was lucky to have them, of how I was tearing the family apart over a simple misunderstanding. No one, it seemed, had been told the full story. They only knew the version my parents had supplied, that they had helped with the wedding, and I had responded with a cruel letter and cut them off. The final blow came from Sarah. She didn't text or call. She showed up. I heard the furious knocking on our apartment door, and I knew it was her. "Ilara, open this door right now," her voice was sharp, imperious. The voice of someone who had never been told no. Leo and I exchanged a look. "Don't," he mouthed. I stood silently in our living room, my heart pounding. "I know you're in there. How could you do this to them? To us? You pay them back like it's some kind of insult and then you block them? You are unbelievable. You should have just paid the damn bill and kept your mouth shut. You're always making everything so difficult." Her words, meant to wound, only solidified my resolve. Of course she would think that. She, who had never had to worry about a bill in her life. She, for whom $1 million gift was just another Tuesday. She was a general in their army, and I was the lone dissident. I didn't answer. I just stood there, listening to her rant, until she finally gave up and stormed away, her footsteps echoing down the hall. The silence she left behind was heavy. The support from Leo's family was a lifeline. His parents were appalled, calling daily to check in, their quiet, steady love a stark contrast to the chaos erupting from my own family. But the constant barrage of disapproval began to wear me down. A seed of doubt started to sprout in the back of my mind. Was I being too sensitive? Did I overreact? I had seen the invoice as the final straw, a moment to reclaim my dignity. But now, ostracized and alone, I wondered if I had just set fire to the only bridge I had, even if it was a rickety, treacherous one. I stood at a crossroads, the path forward obscured by a fog of doubt and hurt, unsure if I was the hero of my own story or the villain of theirs. In the aftermath of the family onslaught, I tried to build a cocoon of normalcy around myself and Leo. We focused on our work, our quiet evenings, the simple joy of building a life together. But the silence from my parents, combined with the noise from everyone else, left me in a state of suspended animation. I felt I had done the right thing, yet the condemnation stung. I was caught in a paradox, liberated and trapped all at once. Then, yesterday, an email slipped through the digital fortress I had built. It was from my mother, sent from her work address, which I hadn't thought to block. I hesitated, my finger hovering over the delete button. Curiosity, that persistent human flaw, won out. I opened it. The email was a novel of self-righteous justification. It was preachy, condescending, and utterly breathtaking in its lack of self-awareness. The invoice, she explained, was never meant to be taken seriously. They had never intended to cash my check. It was, she wrote, a life lesson. According to her, they had always been concerned about my frivolous spending habits, a reference to my love for travel and art, funded entirely by my own hard work. The entire, elaborate charade, offering the wedding as a gift, meticulously planning it with me, and then sending a cold, corporate invoice, had been a test. It was a calculated scheme to gauge my financial responsibility. They wanted to see how I would react. Would I be responsible and pay it? Or would I come to them, head bowed, asking for help? The plan, she concluded, was that once I had learned my lesson, they would dramatically tear up the check in front of me and then, the grand finale, surprise me with a gift of $250,000. I read the email 3 times, each time a fresh wave of disbelief washing over me. A life lesson? This wasn't a lesson, it was a sick, manipulative game. They hadn't wanted to give me a gift, they had wanted to buy my submission. They had dangled the carrot of their love and approval, only to see if I would perform the correct tricks to earn it. The hurt I had felt before was now eclipsed by a cold, clear-burning rage. This wasn't about love or fairness or even family. It was about control. Without a moment's hesitation, I picked up my phone. I opened my mobile banking app, a tool I usually used for simple deposits. I took a photo of the front of the check I had sent them, then the back. I entered the amount $62,451.37 and pressed deposit. A small green check mark appeared on the screen. Your deposit has been submitted. There would be no dramatic check-tearing ceremony. There would be no grand reveal. They had set a trap, and I was not only refusing to step in it, I was making them pay for its construction. Then I turned back to my mother's email and typed a short, precise reply. Subject, wedding expenses reimbursement. Thank you for clarifying that this was a calculated test and not a misunderstanding. I hit send. Then I methodically blocked her work email address and every other conceivable way they could reach me. I wanted no more lessons, no more games, no more communication. The fallout was swift. That evening, the banging on our door began again. It was Sarah, her voice even more shrill and frantic than before. Ilara. Open the door. You cashed the check. Mom called me, she's hysterical. What is wrong with you? I sat on the couch, Leo's hand resting on my shoulder, a silent anchor. I didn't move. It was a test, you idiot, she shrieked through the wood of the door. They were trying to teach you something. They've always worried about you, how you just throw money away. They were going to give you $250,000. The irony was so thick I could have choked on it. Sarah, who had never paid a phone bill that wasn't attached to our parents' account, who had driven cars they bought and lived in houses they funded, was lecturing me on financial prowess. Me, who had budgeted and saved and sacrificed for every single significant thing I owned. As her tirade escalated, a cold, practical thought entered my mind. I quietly picked up my phone, opened the voice memo app, and pressed record. I didn't know why, exactly, but I wanted a record of this unhinged attack. Evidence of the madness I was being subjected to. You are tearing this family apart over nothing, she yelled, her voice cracking with a mix of rage and frustration. It was a misunderstanding. You're being selfish and childish, and you need to apologize and fix this. I remained silent, listening to her list my supposed moral and financial failings. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she ran out of steam. Fine. Be that way, she screamed, her final parting shot. Rot in here with your new perfect life. You're a selfish, money-grubbing brat who is trying to destroy our family. Her footsteps pounded away down the hallway. The silence that followed was immense. Leo let out a long, slow breath. Wow, he said softly. She's really something. The recording was a small, cold comfort. It was proof. Proof that I wasn't exaggerating, that I wasn't the one being irrational. Later that night, my phone, which I had unblocked from extended family just to see the scope of the damage, lit up again. It was clear Sarah had gone straight to our parents, and the propaganda machine was in full swing. My cousin, a woman I had always been close to, sent a message that cut me to the quick. I heard what you did. You need to humble yourself, Ilara. Family is more important than money. Every message was a variation on the same theme. I was ungrateful. I was overdramatic. I was wrong. No one seemed to register the profound cruelty of my parents' test. All they saw was a daughter rejecting a massive sum of money and acting, in their eyes, like a spoiled child. Leo saw the toll it was taking. "Turn it off," he said gently, taking the phone from my hands. "None of them matter. It's a toxic system, and you're the first one brave enough to say no. They're not mad at you, Ilara. They're mad that they can't control you anymore." He was right, but the truth didn't make the isolation any easier. My parents remained silent, content to let their network of loyalists fight their battles for them. I found myself spiraling again, questioning everything. Should I have tried to talk to them face to face? Could a conversation have fixed this? But every time I considered it, I pictured the inevitable outcome, my feelings being dismissed, my words twisted, and the conversation ending with me apologizing for being hurt. It was a cycle I had been trapped in my whole life. For now, all I could do was hold tight to Leo and the quiet life we were trying to build. We were a tiny island in a stormy sea, and all we could do was hope for the tide to turn. The days that followed were a blur of conflicting emotions. The support from Leo and a few trusted friends was a buoy, but the weight of my family's collective disapproval was a powerful undertow, threatening to pull me under. I felt a strange mix of righteous anger and deep, gnawing guilt. Your comments and stories, messages from strangers who had navigated similar waters, became a lighthouse in the fog. They reminded me I wasn't alone, and that my feelings were valid. Then, just as I was beginning to find a fragile equilibrium, the phone rang. The number was unfamiliar. I almost ignored it, bracing for another lecture from a distant relative. But something compelled me to answer. "Ilara," a man's voice asked. It was hesitant, but kind. "Yes? Who is this?" "It's your Uncle Marcus," he said. "Your father's brother." I was floored. I hadn't spoken to Uncle Marcus in at least 15 years. He and my father had had a falling out long ago, an event shrouded in family mystery and whispered rumors. He was the black sheep, the one who had moved away and cut ties. Hello, I managed, my mind racing. "Listen," he said, his voice gaining confidence. "I know this is out of the blue. I've been hearing things through the family grapevine, about you and your parents. I felt like I had to call. I just have a feeling I know what you're going through." I braced myself, expecting him to join the chorus of condemnation. But his next words completely reshaped the architecture of my reality. "This isn't the first time something like this has happened, Ilara," he said, his voice heavy with a history I never knew. "They did it to me, too." He began to tell me a story from 17 years ago. A story about him, my father, and my grandparents. He had been a young man, trying to start his own business. My grandparents, my father's parents, offered to help him with a significant loan. But the money came with impossible strings. They wanted to control his business decisions, his personal life, everything. When Marcus pushed back, trying to establish his own autonomy, they turned on him. It was brutal, he recalled, his voice tight with remembered pain. They didn't just cut me off financially. They launched a smear campaign. They told the entire family I had tried to steal from them, that I was ungrateful and reckless. And your father, your dad stood by and watched it happen. He sided with them. He chose them over his own brother. The air in my apartment grew thick and still. The story was eerily familiar. The financial control, the manipulation, the turning of the family into a weapon against the one who dared to defy them. It was my story, just with different characters and a decade and a half between them. "He abandoned me," Marcus continued, a deep sadness in his voice. "It took me years to understand it wasn't about me. It was about them. About a pattern of control that they learned from their own parents. It's a sickness, Ilara, passed down from one generation to the next. Your father wasn't just a victim of it, he became a perpetrator. And now, he's doing to you what was done to him, and what he helped do to me." The pieces of my life, which had felt like scattered, painful shards, suddenly began to click into place, forming a dark and intricate mosaic. My father's harshness, my mother's complicity, Sarah's role as the compliant, favored child. It wasn't just about me being the lesser daughter. It was a script. A role they had all been playing for decades. Love in our family wasn't a gift, it was a leash. And the moment I refused to wear it, I was cast out, just as my uncle had been. Hearing his story was like holding a mirror up to my own experience. My grandparents had ostracized him completely when he refused to bow to their will. They didn't just cut him off, they tried to erase him, poisoning the family well so that no one would offer him a cup of water. And now my parents, following the same toxic playbook, were doing the same to me. After I hung up with Marcus, I felt a profound shift inside me. The guilt began to recede, replaced by a deep, sorrowful understanding. This wasn't my fault. I hadn't caused this rift, I had simply exposed a fault line that had been running through our family for generations. The messages from relatives continued, but now they felt different. A cousin texted, "You need to show some respect. They are your parents." I read it and saw not just her words, but the echo of a generational command: obey. Conform. Do not question. That evening, Leo and I sat on our balcony, the city lights a distant, blurry sea. I told him everything Marcus had said. He listened patiently, his hand covering mine. "So, it's not you," he said softly when I finished. "It's a legacy." "It seems so," I whispered. "Then you don't owe them anything, Ilara," he said, his voice firm. "Not your guilt, not your compliance, and certainly not an apology. You are building a new legacy, right here with me. One that's based on respect and honesty, not control." His words were a comfort, but as the night wore on, a new, complicated thought took root. My father, perhaps his rigidity wasn't just cruelty. Perhaps it was born of a deep, buried guilt over what he had done to his brother. Was he overcompensating, doubling down on the family playbook because it was the only way he knew how to operate? Just as that thought was settling in, my phone buzzed with a notification. A voicemail. From a number I didn't recognize, but one that my phone, in its infinite wisdom, had labeled Dad. It was from his new cell phone, one I hadn't blocked. My heart hammered against my ribs. I pressed play, holding the phone to my ear. His voice was thin, weary. It lacked the usual booming authority. "Ilara, it's Dad. This has all gone too far. I think we need to talk. If you're willing. Call me." There was no apology. No admission of guilt. But there was a crack in the armor. A hint of surrender. For the first time, he wasn't issuing a command, he was making a request. I didn't know what to do. Part of me, the part that had longed for a father's love my whole life, wanted to call him back immediately. But Marcus's warning echoed in my mind, they might never admit they were wrong. This could be just another move in the game, a new tactic to lure me back into the fold. I was standing at the edge of a precipice, looking down at a path that forked. One way led back into the familiar, toxic forest of my family, with the faint hope of finding a clearing. The other led into the unknown, a future I would have to build myself, free from the shadows of the past. For the first time, I wasn't sure which path was scarier. The weeks following my father's voicemail were a period of intense self-reflection. I listened to your advice, dear readers, and it resonated deeply. Many of you pointed out that I had spent my life trying to smooth things over, to be the good daughter who absorbed the dysfunction and kept the peace. You were right. My default setting was to mend, to forgive, to return to a normal that was never actually normal. It was a strained, painful performance, and I was finally ready to let the curtain fall. I didn't need to go back. I also had to confront a difficult truth about my father. I had been weaving a narrative for him, excusing his behavior by attributing it to guilt over his brother. It was a kinder, more palatable story. But it wasn't the truth. The truth was that his actions, the years of favoritism, the emotional manipulation, the cruel test were his own. Guilt might have been a factor, but it wasn't an excuse. It didn't absolve him. For my own peace, I had to stop making excuses for him. I needed to close this chapter, and I realized I couldn't do it without seeing him one last time. This meeting wouldn't be for him, or for the hope of reconciliation. It would be for me. I agreed to meet him at a quiet, neutral cafe downtown. When he walked in, he looked smaller. The imposing figure who had always held so much power over me seemed diminished, his shoulders slumped, his eyes tired. He didn't offer a direct, clean apology. I knew he wouldn't. But he did something I never expected. He expressed regret. "The wedding, it all got out of hand," he said, stirring his coffee endlessly. "Your mother and I, we handled it badly. It was unfair to you." He told me he had spoken to the relatives, asking them to back off and give me space. And then, he slid a bank envelope across the table. "I wanted to give this back to you," he said. "We never should have, it's yours." Inside was a cashier's check for $62,451.37. A year ago, I would have cried with relief. I would have taken it as the ultimate apology. But I was no longer that person. "No," I said, my voice calm and firm. I gently pushed the envelope back toward him. "I don't want it." A flicker of frustration crossed his face. He didn't understand. For him, money was the language of love, control, and apology. It was his primary tool for interacting with the world. "This was never about the money, Dad," I explained softly. "The money is just a symbol. It's about a lifetime of feeling like I wasn't enough. It's about being treated like a project to be managed instead of a daughter to be loved. Giving me this check doesn't erase any of that." He stared at the envelope, at a loss. It was as if I had refused to accept his apology in the only language he knew how to speak. He was silent for a long time. Then, with a desperation that felt raw and genuine, he looked at me. "I don't want to lose you, Alara." It was the closest he had ever come to telling me he loved me without conditions. I believed him. But his fear couldn't be the reason I stayed. True reconciliation wasn't what I wanted, not in the way he meant it. I wasn't interested in slotting back into the family dynamic, pretending the deep wounds could be stitched up with a single conversation. "I need space," I told him, my voice unwavering. "A lot of it. I came here today for my own closure, not to restart our relationship. I need time to heal, on my own terms." To my astonishment, he didn't argue. He didn't try to guilt me or persuade me. He just nodded slowly, a deep sadness in his eyes. "I understand," he said. And that, in its own quiet way, felt more like an apology than anything else he could have said. As I walked away from the cafe, a strange sense of peace settled over me. There was no dramatic finale, no tearful embrace. It wasn't a resolution, it was a release. I had said my piece. I had stood my ground. And now, the future was mine to write. In the months since, I have been actively curating my peace. I've maintained my distance from the family members who caused me pain. The silence is no longer a void, it is a sanctuary. Leo and I are thriving. We fill our home with laughter, with art, with the quiet, steady rhythm of a love built on a foundation of mutual respect. Our life is our own, a beautiful, vibrant tapestry we are weaving together, free from the tangled threads of my family's past. I still have moments of doubt. I'm human. There are quiet nights when I wonder if I was too harsh, if I should have taken the check, if I threw away my only family. But then I remember the feeling of that invoice, the sting of the test, the decades of feeling invisible. And I know I did the right thing. I chose myself. Sarah has never reached out. I've heard through the grapevine a channel I can't seem to fully shut down that she is angry about my refusal to reconcile. Her loyalty remains, as it always has, with our parents. I have finally let go of the hope that we could one day be close. It's a sad, quiet grief, but it is also liberating. My father's regret felt real, but I don't know if it's enough to ever rebuild what was so thoroughly broken. For now, it doesn't have to be. My focus is on my own healing, my own happiness. This long, painful ordeal taught me the most valuable lesson of all: my self-worth is not up for negotiation. It is not the neat, happy ending one might find in a storybook. But it is the ending I needed. And sometimes, in the beautiful, messy reality of life, that is more than enough. Thank you, all of you, for walking this path with me. Your light made the journey far less lonely.